Welcome to this edition of the Leadership Insight series. That's with one of our associates from the Møller, Michael Chaskalson. Michael, tell us a bit about you.
Well, hi Jeremy, thank you for that. I come to the work that I do at the Møller from a long background in mindfulness. So I started to practice mindfulness in the mid-70s and have had a long and committed practice, including long periods of retreat, solitary retreat, and so on. In around the early 2000s, I did a master's in the clinical applications of mindfulness. Started to work with executive coaches from that. That brought me into organizations. I started to do quite a lot of work in organizations, became a professor of practice at Ashridge Executive Education, an associate at the Møller, and have found myself increasingly working in organizations, teaching mindful leadership, researching mindful leadership, writing books about mindfulness and its applications at work. But more recently, I've wanted to go quite a lot deeper, and I've begun to develop something called quiet ego leadership, which has mindfulness as an element of it, but goes a lot further. And that's something that I'm sure we'll talk about today.
Today, yeah, great, thanks. And I guess you mentioned books, and I imagine immediately somebody might go, well, oh, tell me about that. So just what are a couple of the books that you've written that people might be able to access?
Okay, so Mindfulness for Coaches, The Mindful Workplace, Mindfulness in 8 Weeks, and Mind Time.
Mind Time, yeah, that's the one I'm reading. That's your recent one, isn't it?
That's the most recent.
And just so we're going to talk about what you think are the most important leadership skills and attributes, and also what you think a bit of is overrated, if you like. And kind of heard you say about quiet ego. Well, just so much about mindfulness going on right now. Why is mindfulness important to leadership? Do you mind if we just start there?
Well, I'd be very happy to talk about that. I think the thing that is misunderstood around mindfulness these days is people think about it as a way of calming down, zoning out, getting rid of your thoughts, emptying your mind, and it's none of that stuff. It really, really isn't. What mindfulness is it's profoundly reality focused. It's around what is actually going on now. What's here now? What is actually here now? And it's what's here now in the system, what's here now with this person I'm with, or these people I'm with, what's here now in me. What am I thinking? How am I feeling? What am I sensing? What am I picking up right now? Especially as well, it's about noticing that you're thinking when you're thinking. So seeing in real time what you're up to. This is something that people very often don't catch. You find yourself caught up in a stream of thought, and you don't realize that these are just thoughts. You think that these are kind of realities. Get yourself caught up in a set of ideas, and you start to mistake your ideas about things for things as they actually are, but they're just ideas. So learning how to step back a bit and to observe the operation of your own mind in real time, so you know what you're up to when you're up to it.
Yeah,
big part of what mindfulness is about.
So as I listen to that, I'm thinking sort of real presence, really listening, really awake to what's going on right now.
Yes.
And awake to the way your own mind is working. So something I feel very strongly about myself in terms of leadership quality. So take that then to the next stage and to what you want to talk about here. But I guess in broad terms, what you think a really important leadership attribute is. What do you think is the most important one?
That's lovely. So, well, for me right now, I think one of the key leadership attributes for this particular part of this cycle that we're all in, as people are called on to build back better, or build back leaner, recover, is that people learn to quieten their egos. So I'm speaking quite a lot now about quiet ego leadership. Here's the thing, I think very often in the literature, in leadership literature, and in what you learn in business schools, what's often valued out there in the wider society, is a set of attributes that come from what's been called transformational leadership. The notion of the leader is the kind of key figure who sets the vision and whose charisma communicates a set of values and ideas that people align themselves with and get behind in order to, create value. And there have been a number of successful transformational leaders in this respect. They've created tremendous value. They've also destroyed tremendous value. Yeah, and I'm not going to name names here, but there are, even in recent times, in the business pages, accounts of leaders who've wiped out billions of dollars or pounds in value from their own companies and who've been lauded previously for their transformational qualities. So there's that. In some ways, well, it's been an interesting paper published recently by O'Reilly and Chapman, and I think the California Review of Management, who talk about the fact that grandiose, entitled, self-confident, and sometimes hostile, manipulative leaders, such as some of these, have profiles which match very nearly what the American Psychiatric Association would describe as narcissistic personality disorder.
Right.
And I think some of what we're teaching and lauding in some of our context is upholding a kind of narcissism. Yeah. And it's not just at the top of organizations. I think it's at all levels in organizations. Something that I've come to say is that noisy egos at all levels in organizations bend teams and organizations out of shape.
Wow.
They encourage a kind of compliance and a kind of yes-manism, because someone is so charismatic, so forward, so follow me, and so intolerant of difference that, what they create in their wake is a kind of stifled compliance and a reduced creativity.
So there's two bits to this, two questions coming in my mind. I guess the first one would be, how do you develop it? How do you develop a quiet ego leadership then?
Yeah. So there's been some really interesting science emerging around this. In the psychological literature, there's a developing literature around quiet ego states, sometimes known as hypoegoic phenomena, excuse the language, reduced ego phenomena. And if we just look at quiet ego states, people writing about this talk about 4 components of the quiet ego state. First one being mindfulness. So that when you're mindful, you're able to see your own mind at work better. And what really is helpful here is that you can see your ego at work, because we all have an ego. Everyone's got an ego. We've got that inner voice that's chattering away to us all the time, saying, hey, this is a great experience. This is a great experience. Look, this is wonderful. Gosh, yeah, I'm really enjoying this experience. This is good. This is good. I want to take a picture of this. I want to stick it up on Instagram. That'd be great. That'd be great. Yeah, nice experience. And then it's also thinking about, well, am I ready? Did I prepare the slides? Will they like it? Will they like it? Is it going to go okay? No, it won't go okay. Last time it didn't go okay. What is it that they don't like about me? Why don't they like me? They should. I don't know. I'm trying. Blah blah blah, etc., etc., etc. Now that voice has been granted us by evolution to help us to plan, to learn from our mistakes, to stand slightly apart from ourselves and judge ourselves. Unfortunately, it's way out of order these days. It's hyper active. It dominates our experience. When you're mindful, you can see this voice for what it is, just ego chatter. And you learn how to come slightly away from it, how to calm it, see it for what it is, not be so much enthralled to it. So that's the first piece. First piece is to recognize that. The second piece is around noticing your interdependence, being aware of your interdependence, that we're not single isolated entities, ultimately separate from each other, but we exist in a kind of web of life.
Yeah.
You know, a virus emerges in Wuhan, and 3 months later, the world's economies crash, we all go into lockdown, people are dying, and terrible things are emerging. This is the interdependent web of life. You can't just close your borders and keep it out. It doesn't work like that. Life doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Every event everywhere touches all of us.
Yeah.
And we depend on each other, and we interdepend not only on each other, but on the rest of nature. So you come to see that, you come to recognize deeply your interdependence, that you exist in this web of life.
Yeah.
And then the third piece is that, well, when you recognize this interdependence, the natural affective response, emotional response to that is a kind of compassion, a care, a concern.
Yeah.
I think of it like this, Jeremy. It's like, you know, if you get a thorn in your foot, your hand doesn't sit there going, hey, whoa, it's the foot's problem. No thorn here. No,
Yeah.
no, I'm fine. You know, naturally, you know, if you get a thorn in your foot, your hand goes there to comfort the foot, to remove the thorn, because it's one organism.
Yeah.
And that's what it's like. Life is one organism, a complex web of life, and that's where we live. So it's this, someone else's suffering is my suffering. I'm concerned to alleviate it, to do what I can,
Yeah.
do what I can for others, act for the best, which brings us to the fourth component, which is values, and which is, what are the values that I live by? What matters to me? What do I really care about? What do I want to be known for? You know, do I want to be known you know, at my funeral? Do I want people to say, hey, wow, he really ticked his KPIs in Q3?
Yeah.
Or do they want to, or do I want people to say he was a really kind and decent guy?
Mm.
You know, so what are my real values? What do I really care about? And
Yeah.
can I live from those? So
And
those are the four things: mindfulness, interdependence, compassion, and values.
And as I listen to you, then I'm thinking about narcissism, which you mentioned earlier, and what occurs to me is the kind of way in which life appears to be setting up hero leaders, for example. You know, and we expect. It's not only just that I become narcissistic; it's that the world seems to somehow expect that of me. Just talk to me about narcissism then, and that link, because all of those things, that particularly the interdependence, feels to me like could also lead towards a narcissism.
Ah, that's interesting. Could you just unfold the steps a bit for me? That's really interesting.
Yeah, just what that's my, I don't know, and you can tell me this, is that it occurs to me that my narcissism might also be something that's created by the world around me, not just around
I
something
see what
inside
you're
of
saying.
myself.
So I think I understand.
Yeah.
So
And
are you saying that if people are putting me on a pedestal,
yeah,
I stand on the pedestal. So to some extent, yes, I get that, and I've seen that.
yeah,
Sometimes, you know, leaders who stand on pedestals have been put there. They didn't particularly, well, I think they colluded in the process.
of course, yeah,
Yeah.
and probably not very mindful, by the way.
Yeah. So it's tricky not to collude in that process.
Yeah.
I get that. I do get that. Now, I've been in leadership positions myself in various organizations where I've noticed people wanting to have a leader who they can put on a pedestal. And it's very, very tricky to avoid that. And I think that one of the ways to avoid that is by being willing simply to communicate one-to-one authentically. By being willing to be vulnerable, by being willing to show your vulnerability, not parade it, but just reveal it, allow it. And by just trying to communicate one-to-one.
Yeah.
It is tricky.
Yeah.
I get that. I've been in situations, you know, where I've gone with, say, a CEO in a big organization into the company canteen for lunch, and you just watch the system rippling away from him and being bent out of shape, and the smiles that appear, and the, you know, people sometimes in those positions live very awkward lives when it comes to their followers.
Yeah.
It's difficult for them. Yeah.
Just taking your trainer, and I don't want to get in the way of what you wanted to say about narcissism, but it occurs to me that if one is narcissistic, then it's harder for one to have really intimate one-to-one conversations, as you talked about, or harder for me to express my vulnerability. I don't know, I'm just sort of just taking forward what you're saying, but I'd love to hear more from you about what is it that you wanted to tell us about narcissistic leaders that's useful to me.
I don't think I'm so much interested in trying to work with narcissistic leaders. I think, well, for a start, I think if it's come to the state of narcissistic personality disorder, then actually a different kind of work is called for. I'm more interested in helping to develop leaders such that they don't get tempted down that path.
Okay, great. Yeah. So tell us more about that.
Well, again, so this would be about, well, first of all, teaching, you know, some of the qualities of quiet ego leadership, and helping people to practice things like mindfulness, like compassion, help people to recognize their interdependence, and to uncover and actualize the values that they hold.
Yeah. Okay, great.
And so this involves, you know, discussion around and teaching around all of these domains.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, a quiet ego leadership training process is certainly, you know, possible, and it's something that I am developing in various contexts.
Yeah. Brilliant. And just an example then, you know, one of the things we talked about was what we thought about in preparation was an example of a quiet ego leader. What's yours? What's your example?
Yeah. So I thought of a Cambridge example. This fabulous man called Max Perutz, who won a Nobel Prize for the discovery of the structure of hemoglobin. And he founded the Laboratory for Molecular Biology here in Cambridge back in '62 and ran it through to '79. So that was home to people like Crick and Watson, and a total of 9 Nobel Prize winners. At its peak, he had about 90 researchers working for him there. But people would never describe themselves as working for him. They would describe themselves as doing their work, I would guess. So he recruited certainly very, very bright people, and he had great resources. There's no doubt of that. But what he did with his people is he let them get on with it, and he got out of their way. He got out of their way. Then people describe never having felt him looking over their shoulder. And when one of the researchers there was talking about the fact that for 2 years he was getting nowhere in his research, in his experiments. It just wasn't happening. But Perutz would always just be encouraging, just listen to him, allow him to talk through the problems, allow him to talk through the difficulty he was facing, not come in with solutions, but just hear him out, be encouraging, let him know that he had his back and he should just continue and get on with it. And that was a remarkably successful laboratory, probably the world's most successful laboratory.
Yeah.
And what it involved is Perutz, no grandstanding. It was never about him. It was always just about allowing people to do what they wanted to do and what they knew to do best, and creating a kind of collegial atmosphere around him. Now, I guess a molecular research laboratory is rather different to, you know, some of the businesses that where you and I speak and work. But nonetheless, there's something there about not getting in people's way as a leader.
Yeah.
It's about encouraging and standing alongside, rather than leading from the front that
Yeah.
I find, very, very impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. And just interesting, I'd never heard of him before, Max Perez. So funnily about that, sort of almost fits with the story that you're telling, isn't it? Of course, I've heard of Crick and these other people, but never heard of him.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes, indeed. That's an interesting fact, isn't it? So, in certain ways, he could have been the big star of this story.
Yeah.
But that was never his style.
But, enabling others, creating the space in which others can be at their best.
Yes, exactly.
What you're saying. Yeah.
Exactly.
And just one last question is, in a way, what gets in the way of it? It's so obvious as I listen to you. It just feels so obvious that that's a really fantastic leadership trait. Quiet ego leadership. What's stopping us?
That's such a good question, Jeremy. I think one of the issues in our culture in general is I think that we are sometimes enthralled to certain narratives. We're enthralled to certain ideas and stories that have taken hold in the culture around heroic style leadership, and so on. And you could trace back, the origin of some of these into a whole variety of different systems, religious systems, political systems, and so on. So I think to some extent there is that. We have historically been shaped by some of these stories. The stories of heroism is so common in culture. And yet, some of the stories of heroism are stories of the wounded hero or the failed hero, and that tends to be erased. We don't look deeply enough sometimes at some of the hero stories that we tell. So if you like, in the deeper mythology, the heroes who come unglued, the heroes who come unstuck, the heroes who fall victim to their own story, sort of come to their own publicity, and that undermines them in the end.
Yeah, the unsung heroes often, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you think about the tragic tradition and the way in which heroism always ends up, well, often in the tragic tradition, heroism ends up in a fall.
Yeah.
So there's something that the culture is also trying to tell us that perhaps we're not adequately listening to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think about what gets publicized and given attention to. It's often money or power.
Yeah. The
rather decency or yeah.
And yet that's something that we all do care for. When we see it, when we notice it, we respond to it.
That's it. Yeah. Even in the stories of this lockdown, the number of stories of people doing good things has come through, isn't it?
Exactly. And the nation just responds. Of course, there's that lovely story of Major Tom.
Yeah.
Or Sir Major Tom, Captain, or whoever he was. This really wonderful, heroic guy. And his very, very, very self-effacing, quiet heroism. And we as a nation tried so hard to put him up on a pedestal. But he seemed successfully to resist that and to just stay himself.
Yeah. So as we come to the end of this, and I'd love your comment on this. It does seem to me that there's this kind of, we know that quiet ego leadership and the move towards quiet ego leadership is the right thing, for example, for leadership. And yet our society and all of our systems seem to be working towards the opposite. And it's just, that's a dilemma, I guess, that makes it even more important to have the mindfulness to notice what you're being. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And compassion and values.
Yeah. Anything more you want to say before we close this?
Well, thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much for probing. Yeah.
Oh no, thank you. It's been lovely. Thank you very much. Learned a lot. So we'll close it, and I just want to say thank you to everybody for watching. And I hope you look forward to the next one of these series in about a week's time. Thanks, Michael. Thanks very much.